Hi, fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I'm fantasy writer Neil Mack, the author of Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I want to share my love of folklore, local history and nature mythology with writers and creatives like you on my regular podcasts. It's designed with fellow indie publishers and writers in mind, but all fans of fantasy fiction are very welcome to join in. In my fantasy writer's kit bag, writers, artists and creatives will find lots of ideas and discussion about things such as potions, dark arts, fabulous creatures, folktale studies, nature lore, and the interesting history behind the myth and magic that underpins our understanding of the fictional universe. Hello fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. So what I've been up to, sparrow gifts. Last week I encountered a very odd and perhaps magical and certainly charming and mysterious experience from my conservatory window. So, let me fill you in. I sit in an office and I face the wall, but behind me is a beautiful conservatory. And I've been watching each day, each morning, some cheerful little birds, some house sparrows that congregate in a hedge just outside my windows. And I've been watching them and they've been cheering me up since this emergency began. I've been confined in my self-isolation for a bit longer than others, perhaps a bit more longer than you, because I already had been shaking off flu-like symptoms that I caught about 4 weeks ago. And it's fine, by the way, in case you ask. And anyway, self-isolation is, in reality, for an author, a way of life. Probably for all artists, actually, because we're very used to being confined in our cells for long periods with just our imaginations to preserve us. Anyway, going back to the house sparrows. These house sparrows, little birds, bring me a little dose of cheer each day. They tend to chatter and fuss non-stop. They don't seem to be fighting, but they seem to be squabbling, and which is why they're so much fun to watch. And they play and they flutter in my hedge just outside. The hedge is only about 12 inches from my window, and I'm fairly certain because of that they can see me as much as I can see them. Anyway, last Friday, something odd happened. I'd been putting up some bird seed for them, and I'd been experimenting with different feeders because I'd noticed that the sparrows will not go to the feeders while other birds will. Now I've got some other feeders which are about 10 metres away from the hedge, and these attract a whole load of birds, for example various different tits and finches and squirrel and some pigeons. But they never attract the sparrows, so I've been experimenting with different types of feeder in the hope that they would entice the sparrows to them. But they seem content in chirping and cheeping in the hedge, and they don't really want to go to the feeder. But during the early part of Friday morning, these sparrows began to bring me white feathers. They brought white feathers and stuck them to the hedge. Lots of these house sparrows brought white feathers with them, and I watched them as they started to stick them to the hedge. Now, all the feathers they brought to the hedge were white, even though sparrows are grey-brown or flecked or mostly hazel-brown in colour. And these individual sparrows began to stick the white feathers on prominent bits of twig, as if they were putting up little flags. Now, when I first observed this curious behaviour, I thought maybe they were collecting the feathers as nesting material and were checking the size and the softness and the quality of the fluffiness of the feathers, and then realising they weren't suitable, they were abandoning them for whatever reason, possibly because they were unacceptable for their nests. But, very oddly, by noon the same day, all the sparrows had gone, because they tend to play during the early morning and they tend to go back to their nest in the afternoon, but they'd left behind all their white feather flags, and I counted 30 white feathers stuck to twigs on the hedge. Now I researched what this might mean, and I was surprised to find that in some First Nation, that means Native American cultures, there's a belief that a feather that's been sent from heaven is a gift, and that someone up there is saying thanks. So were the sparrows saying thanks for me leaving them some seeds? Well, of course, feathers, and perhaps especially white feathers, mean so much. They mean travel, and they mean spirit, and they mean freedom, and they mean inspiration, and they have a connection with limitless skies and, of course, the limitless beyond. And that's why Native Americans and Aboriginal tribes use feathers in their sacred ceremonies, because feathers are a symbol of giving thanks and appreciation, but also they're associated with the heavens, because birds become the consorts of the gods and goddesses because they are flying up high. And they might also be able to communicate messages to those above us. So many cultures use feathers to lift prayers and intentions up to the gods. And I also ask you, is that why angels are portrayed with bird-like wings and with feathers? Anyway, in Celtic culture, Druids wore ornate feathered robes, and Druids wore these feathered robes in ceremonies that helped them understand the celestial realm, the world above us. Ancient Celts believed that wearing the feathered cloak would allow the Druid to transcend our earthly plane and to enter into the ethereal realm. There's also a modern idea, and it is quite modern, that unexpectedly finding a feather, and especially a white feather, is a message from a dearly departed. And perhaps it's because feathers, once released, are no longer bound by the heavy burdens of this world. They're no more bound by gravity, for example. And so, like a spirit, they can soar up free into heaven. And they might be associated with the use of communicating between realms. Feathers, as a symbol of the soul, are free to ascend. And artists have often used the symbol of a white dove, for example, to represent the Holy Spirit. Now, if you believe that feathers are a communication tool that's used by God or by lesser gods, then their appearance is perhaps a reminder that we ought to listen to a bigger voice or a higher authority than our own. But I have another explanation for my sparrow feathers, and it's no less amazing, and it's possibly more scientific, and it's this. On Saturday morning, all the white feathers were gone. Every single one. I looked really hard. There were none left. They haven't come back. My guess is, though, and I can't prove it, that the house sparrows got up before me and they'd taken all their feathers away, possibly back to their nests. And their nests, by the way, are under the gutters of our house. And that's when I come up with my possible scientific explanation for their white feather-giving gift. And it's this. Incidentally, although it might be more rational, it's still amazing. Were they sticking those feathers onto twigs to dry them out? Were they sticking those white feathers onto twigs, a bit like hanging sheets or blankets onto a washing line, to dry the feathers overnight? And then once dry, were they then usable so they could be taken back to their nests and used to line their nests? Now, if this scientific explanation is true, and who knows, it's no less true or no less impressive and wonderful than believing that sparrows were leaving little gifts for me as a sign of their appreciation, then it's a very amazing and curious thing to witness, isn't it? Now, just to let you know, by the way, that luckily, before they took all the feathers away, I'd already taken a short video of the phenomena, and I also took some still shots of the white feathers in situ in my hedge. And if you go to my site at neilmach, Neilmach, all one word, .me, M-E, and then go to my show notes, or find in my search box, type in sparrow feather, then you'll find my photographs and my little video of it. Good luck with your period of self-isolation, and if you experience anything that you think is odd, weird, fantastic, curious, or supernatural during your period of confinement, then please tweet me at Neilmach, all one word, and I'll share. Good luck. My sparrow feathers. Myth and magic news. Vampire bats. There's been news this week about a study, it's a recent study published in the journal that's titled Current Biology, into relationships formed by vampire bats. And this new study tends to prove what we, us speculative fiction fans and us fantasy authors, have known for some time, and that is that vampires French kiss with blood. They French kiss with blood to form lasting bonds between partners. So researchers have observed that these animals are kissing with blood, and they've noticed also that this sharing behaviour appears to be an important aspect of the bats' pair bonding. Professor Gerald Carter, author of the study and a behavioural ecologist at Ohio State University, said, "Food sharing in vampire bats is like how a lot of birds regurgitate their food for their offspring, but with vampire bats, they do it for other adults. This helps with the pair bonding." He added that bats would groom even after their fur had been cleansed, suggesting that the behaviour was not just an issue of maintaining hygiene. Vampire bats are the only animals to feed entirely on blood, which they get by biting larger animals such as cattle. The flying creatures can drink up to half their body weight in blood a day, unlike their other bat relatives, which generally die on fruit, nectar or insects. International researchers have analysed both the genome of the vampire bat and also its microbiome, that means the microorganisms that live inside the gut, and they found that the genome size was similar to that of other bats, but the genome contained more jumping genes, and these are DNA sequences that change position in the genome. And these were found in areas involved in immune response, viral defence, and both lipid and vitamin metabolism, suggesting that they played a key role in the evolution of the bat's specialised diet. There are three kinds of vampire bat native to the Americas: the common vampire, the hairy-legged vampire, and the white-winged vampire. Vampire bats only hunt when it is fully dark, and in addition to using low-energy sound impulses, it's thought that the bats also detect their prey, or the warmest spot on their prey, by using something called thermoception, which is infrared detection. It's thought that the English word vampire originates from the Slovak term vrepica, which means to stick into or to thrust into. And so ufa is to thrust. And the notion of vampirism has existed for millennia, and it runs across cultures, from ancient Greeks and ancient Romans to the northeast of India and even into Africa. Virtually all Slavic cultures have rich folk mythologies and customs around vampires. Yeah, and this is quite interesting. Clearly, all of these cultures would not have known of or ever encountered a vampire bat, not until the European colonisation of the Americas in the 15th century, because Christopher Columbus obviously discovered the Americas in 1492. So, bit of a mystery there, but vampire bats, yes, they French kiss with blood. What is sorcery and how does it work? This week, for fantasy fiction writers, I wanted to cover the subject of sorcery, also known as maleficium, malevolent sorcery. Sorcery is an act of witchcraft that's performed with the intention of causing damage, injury or harm. The association of sorcery with the devil made Western witchcraft unique and differently experienced to the witchcraft found in Africa and the Americas. And from the 14th to the 18th century, witches that practiced sorcery were believed to repudiate Jesus and to replace his forgiving love with worship of the devil, and to make pacts with the devil. But anyway, charges of maleficium are often prompted by little more than suspicion. It's often just one person blaming another person for misfortune that's been dealt to them. After the blatant ethnocentrism demonstrated by President Trump last week towards the peoples of China, you might expect some kind of accusation, that most likely will be coming soon, that the Chinese people or the Chinese government hid or disguised the readily discernible early signs and symptoms of the coronavirus from the outside world. The allegation, I've no doubt, will be that something bad happened that can't be readily explained, and we feel that the Chinese are responsible. And because the Chinese don't like us, we suspect them of harming our society. And that, of course, is what occult means, AOCCULT, and it's bound to come, and it's an allegation of malevolent sorcery. In France, in 1022, a group of heretics in Orleans were accused of orgy, infanticide, invocations of demons and blasphemy. They were part of a broad pattern of hostility against certain marginalised groups. It's worth noting that the role women played in such heresies is why we stereotypically think of a witch as a female. And of course, women always have been a marginalised group. Methods of sorcery include incantations. These are chants that invoke evil spirits to do the work. Divination. This is trying to predict future events. Producing amulets or charms to ward off evil spirits or guard against harmful events. To make potions, in other words, to give cures against ills, but also to provide supernatural powers against your enemies. And the production of dolls and puppets, who represent your enemies, to hold power over them. During the 13th century, sorcery was involved in many deaths. These were thought to be done through magic, but were probably most usually associated with poisoning. In 1324, there was a famous case involving Lady Alice Kyteler and a series of events caused by sorcery in Ireland. A contemporary author of the time said, Lady Alice Kyteler was charged with performing magical rites, having sexual intercourse with demons, attempting to divine the future, and poisoning her first 3 husbands. If you're thinking of using sorcery in your fantasy fiction novel, keep in mind the implicit malevolence of the sorcerer involved. For example, in the tale of Snow White, which is loosely based on an ancient Roman legend, by the way, the evil new queen, and we could call her the witch queen if you want, practices divination and incantation because she does the whole magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And she administers a potion, in this case the poisoned apple. Also keep in mind the symbolism of sorcery and the symbolism of certain articles and their implications. For example, in the Snow White tales, we have the colours of white, which means purity. We have the colours of red, which means blood or communion wine. We have the colour black, which means darkness. We have the apple. This is possibly because the woman Eve was seduced by the devil into eating the forbidden fruit, which is always seen artistically as an apple. And we also have the awakening of Snow White, when a prince offers freedom through love of resurrection. You see how it can be combined with religious ideas. And by the way, in this story, or in any of these types of stories where there's a damsel in distress, there's often a hero who must embark on some kind of quest to liberate the damsel from the evil spell that's set by a sorcerer. So by all means use sorcery in your fantasy fiction, but bear in mind that it's normally a malevolent type of magic, and also bear in mind some of the imagery and some of the symbolism that sorcery involves. Good luck with your project. Let me know how you get on. Magic word of the week: existential crises. It's more of a term, really, I suppose, than a word, but an existential crisis is, in its simplest form, when an individual questions whether his or her own life has any meaning, purpose or value. Many of us in the coming weeks and months might face our own existential crises, unless we have something spiritual, ideological or transcendental to cling onto. Or, if you are a humanist and you believe it with some conviction that the value and agency of human beings is not determined or dictated by some supernatural force or entity, then you might want to look at philanthropy, in other words, becoming directly involved in some initiatives that are for the public good, that will focus on the quality of life for other citizens to make any sense at all of the emergency we're currently living through. What is the point and the meaning and the purpose of human existence if we live our life alone and we die? That's the type of question that folk have been asking for millennia. And during a life-threatening emergency, such as the one we're going through now, or if we're faced with unprecedented trauma and isolation and possibly the fear of losing those people or those things we love the most, for example, our notion of freedom, then we're all most likely to fall into an existential crisis. Psychologists and philosophers have long held that most of us will suffer some kind of existential despair if we're unable to handle unexpected and or extreme life experiences. And that's why so many of us hold on to, or in some cases make a new leap of faith into a notion of abstract belief, into a notion of a spiritual being or some kind of religious or pseudo-religious concept. It's as if one believes in the existence of reality beyond our limited world, and when we do so, it's easier to make sense of things we don't understand, and it's easier to cope with any trauma that we might have to endure. And this is even true if this leap of faith is into an irrational belief, and possibly even an intangible or empirically unprovable belief. Nevertheless, it offers some comfort and solace. For example, during the plague in the 17th century in Britain, folk believed in talismans. I covered talismans in the last show, by the way, or abracadabras, and they wore protective charms to protect themselves from catching the plague. And you'll see for yourself in news reports that various people, including President Trump, by the way, who suggested last week drinking quinine as some kind of abracadabra, many people try to sell you what is considered to be, and probably will be considered to be, magical cures that offer salvation and hope. The collapse of our consumer culture will probably accelerate existential crises in all our societies, and will probably bring about more faith adventures, which perhaps will be a good thing. Watch this space. Existential crises. Wildflower of the week. This week, the Primrose. Last week, I went out for a little walk just before the lockdown, and I saw a tiny primrose by a wall, and I'm going to put the photo of it on my show notes. If you go to Neil Mackle, one word, neilmach.me, you'll find it. The primrose is also known as the Easter rose or the butter rose, and it's a symbol of hope that's brought by nature, if you like, to celebrate spring. And the rose-shaped blooms of the primrose are often described as stars by poets. The prim bit of the word, by the way, doesn't mean that he's a very proper person. It means prima, the first. Thus, the first rose of the year, prima rosa. And the Latin name for the vulgaris, which is the common primrose, is primula. In Ireland, the wildflower is known as Samhairtion, or the Mayflower, and is considered to be the harbinger of spring. Thus, etymologically speaking, it shares a connection with Samhain, which is the Celtic period of winter and the darker part of the year. So it has Celtic pagan origins, and it has connections with protective and cleansing powers. And it has connections as well with rituals involving spirits and fairies. Nevertheless, churches tend to decorate their interiors with primroses, certainly at Mothering Sunday and at Eastertide. The flowers and the leaves of a primrose are edible. The flavour is said to be like lettuce, but perhaps a bit more bitter. And the leaves can be cooked into a soup and used to make tea. And the young flowers can be made into primrose wine. And primroses are said to be painkillers. They have an analgesic quality. Because they resemble roses, although they are not roses, but they resemble roses, primroses have become a symbol for Rose Sunday, which is the fourth Sunday in Lent, and also, therefore, a symbol of the Mother Church, as well as mothers in general. And through this connection, they are connected to the Holy Mother, which is the Blessed Virgin Mary, whose symbol is a rose. So primroses are connected to Celtic pagan origins, but also Christian origins. Wildflower of the week, the butter rose or the primrose.